What if I told you all it took was a pair to win it all?
Phil Ivey, the most famous gambler in the world, was accused of cheating casinos of multiple millions of dollars.
Ivy and a female accomplice.
My name is Chang Yin Sam. Everybody call me just Kelly.
Kelly's son is probably the most dangerous match player in the world right now.
The all-new 30 for 30 podcast. Subscribe now on the ESPN app or Apple Podcasts.
30 for 30 podcast is presented by Mini. We're finding the best sports stories for you right now. And to do that, we're behind the wheel of the new Mini Countryman, the biggest Mini yet.
Please proceed to the highlighted route.
To find great sports stories, you have to get out into the world and follow your instincts. That's where the new Mini Countryman's all-wheel drive comes in handy. With all four, we can chase down a story in the city, the country, and most places in between. No matter what story you're chasing, the new Mini Countryman will help you find it. It's available now, and so are 30 for 30 podcasts.
Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Golic Jr., I'm Jason Fitz. It's the Right Time on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. As always, ESPN Radio presented by Progressive Insurance. Mike Golic Jr., we're going to start with Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contract. Ezekiel Elliott. His appeal hearing is going to happen today, and there's a lot. There's a little win here for some people and a lot of loss. It really feels to me, the more I look at this thing, like somebody's going to come out of this entire process with a lot of egg on their face. Whether it's the league for essentially throwing down the gauntlet and handling it the way they've handled it, whether it's Jerry Jones for coming in and defending the player, or whether it's the player himself in Ezekiel Elliott. I can't find a winner in this situation. It feels like we're going to see a situation where somebody very powerful and very prominent in the NFL walks away from this entire appeal process not in the best light.
It's a situation where you'd kind of expect that, considering the subject matter, and that's why it's taken so long. That's why this is the point we're at, and that's why Zeke Elliott and his side are arguing against this as strongly as they are, is because this is a very serious, allegation feels like the wrong word on the part of the NFL, but that's essentially what it is. And I understand that's a little more of a legal term in an area where this didn't garner any sort of legal ramifications for Zeke Elliott, but it's got that kind of reputation staining notion on the line, especially when now you buck back as hard as Zeke Elliott and Jerry Jones both have on the Cowboys side.
Well, and at some point, what's interesting to me is that we're still just running around in circles, the rest of us. And I understand that there's no obligation here to give us information. Nobody owes us information in this process. They're going through their own due process from the NFL side, from the player side, from the Cowboys side. They're all sort of handling it the way they want to handle it. But we're left to sit here and sort of try and guess at this point, because the league says there's an abundance of evidence, and they've told us what it is, but we don't really know. And then Ezekiel Elliott and Jerry Jones have come out and said, no, there's absolutely no evidence, but they haven't told us what it all means. So we're standing here looking at, I feel like I'm scratching my head watching, two people go at it, and I don't, even though I'm in the room, I can't figure out what they're really arguing about, because at the core of it all, we don't have all the information. Nobody has just stepped up and said, here's our case, here's our files, and here's why we've done what we've done.
No, and the NFL at least sounds like, from what we've heard, is their evidence is, picture evidence of the injuries to Zeke Elliott's girlfriend, is it Tiffany Thompson, who won't be present for any of the appeals process today, won't be around for a lot of that. We know that came up in the Ray Rice appeals process, back many years ago when that was an issue. But no, with this, we know enough that the NFL has basically built evidence around those photos, around a timeline that they believe that they match up with, and have their beliefs based off that and everything they know, and really, in my mind, are doing the only thing that they could do in light of their past screw-ups with this domestic violence process, which is something you can't ignore in all this. Going back to when they screwed everything up with Josh Brown and the Giants situation, was it a year or two ago now, it said basically, after promising 6 games as the minimum or just at least hammering that number home for people the last time they reworked the domestic violence policy and failing to deliver on that in a few different regards since then. The NFL's painted itself into a place where it hasn't been consistent on this. The public backlash has reflected that, and now they've got to start being consistent at some point, and maybe fair or unfairly to Zeke Elliott, depending on how the facts of this shake out and if we ever get to know him, is really irrelevant to the NFL on that point.
Here's the information you guys need to know. This appeal is going to happen today, but there won't be an immediate ruling. Obviously, it's a 6-game suspension, like Golic Jr. just mentioned. That's the benchmark that's been set in these cases, six games. Harold Henderson is going to be the arbiter that's going to hear the appeal hearing. He does have some history. He heard the appeal for Greg Hardy and was part of the reduction of that from 10 games to 4 games back in 2015. But he was also the person that heard Adrian Peterson's appeal, and he didn't change that suspension. So there's not really an opportunity here to look at it and say, okay, we can get some indication of how it's going to play out. All we can do is listen to everybody talk. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest, most dependable 4G LTE networks. And as they go through and talk about it, we can only figure that at some point we'll get a decision, but we don't know when. We don't know what it'll be. We don't know if it'll affect the Cowboys week 1. We don't know what the next step in the process will be for Jerry Jones. We're just sort of sitting here, and it's like, pass the popcorn. I'm going to sit here, I'm going to eat, and I'm just going to watch and see what happens, because there's nothing else we can do at this point to figure out what's next.
No, but I think it gets interesting because we were talking before the show about this, the timeline and the way this works out for the Cowboys, because we know with who they've hired for this process on their side, legally, this looks like something that most people are preparing for in the long haul. And we remember how a lot of this went with Deflategate, just based on the stays that were put in place and the delays in the appeals process and all the different courts that went through, and how it pushed the suspension time back essentially an entire calendar year for that one. But for the Cowboys in this situation, and in subject matter that is a lot different and that probably benefits from, at this point, a swifter reaction, because the process leading up to this has all been what the NFL can justify as due diligence in an area where they need to show that.
You mentioned due diligence, and obviously the league took their time in coming to this decision. Diana Rossini, our very own ESPN NFL reporter, talked on SportsCenter about the league's decision on the violation. This is what she had to say.
Its accuser, Tiffany Thompson, will not be here today, nor will any of her notes or transcripts from when she met with NFL investigators. And finally, this can only go 3 ways, guys. The suspension will be upheld, reduced, or dismissed, although it's important to note that there's no mechanism in place where Elliott could face a stiffer punishment.
That's Diana Rossini breaking it down. And Golic, I mean, you hear those 3 results. It's just none of it's easy to try and figure out when the best time is for the Cowboys, because that has to be part of their strategy of figuring out what they want to do. They want to defend somebody if they feel that he's innocent, and Jerry Jones has obviously dug his heels in at that. If that's the way they're going to present this, they still have to make a decision of how they're going to fight this and what makes the most sense for the team short-term and long-term, right?
Well, unless that response was more reactive than it should have been on the part of the Cowboys, then they've already made that decision, haven't they, that they're willing to go as long as they believe that the argument on their side is still just and valid, and that their belief in Zeke Elliott's innocence is still the case. Because if you were going to think about how this played into the timeline of your season, which is something that would be an uncomfortable thought, again, given the fact that this is domestic violence we're dealing with and not some on-the-field issue like Vontaze Burfict in the hearing that's also being held today. So I think that gets a lot tougher, because if this was one thing about just when it was going to affect you, you wouldn't have so strongly supported guilt or innocence on the part of your player in Zeke Elliott and the suspension that seems to be coming up. Because on the other side with the NFL, their position, and this is very clear, is if it is anything, if it's a reduction or if it's dismissed altogether, that's a catastrophe for the NFL.
Is it, though? I mean, it's a catastrophe for the NFL, possibly, but if the PR campaign comes back and says, you know what, the NFL took too much time and they were too stringent and they were too tough on what they considered was serious domestic assault, if that's what they come back with, I mean, that's not the worst public perception answer. If you want to come in and say, man, they were just too tough on what they thought was significant, I don't think that's necessary. That's far less of a PR nightmare than the opposite situation where video eventually comes out and we find out that they were far too lenient.
Wait, so what are you saying? Because I'm saying if the NFL is forced to reduce this or throw this out through the appeals prospect, that's a nightmare for them.
See, I'm saying that if Roger Goodell comes out and says, you know what, this is the investigation we did, here's the information we have, we made the decision that we feel it's worth a 6-game suspension. Now, the arbitrator came in and said no, but we still feel that way. I think that there's still – that's not egg on Roger Goodell's face.
That's an arbitrator – in my mind, that was picked by the league, right? Roger Goodell could have been the arbitrator himself. He's got that power, or can pick somebody else in his stead to do this. So this all comes back to them. This responsibility falls back on them.
But the interesting part of it to me is that if you come back and say, hey, you guys were too tough on this, and they say, oh, sorry, my bad, we were too tough on domestic assault. Like, that's not a PR nightmare. It is a PR nightmare if they come back and say, oh, my God, you weren't tough enough on domestic assault.
Well, and that's my point, is if it gets reduced to 4 games, then they're not going to look at who levied down those 4 games. They're going to look at, yet again, the NFL didn't deliver on that 6 games it told us when it revamped this whole thing. It held up 6 games, and this is where the NFL stepped in on this, is because in the fine print it said, with room for more or less. But they came out and banged on the table and said, 6 games, that's going to be it, with room for more or less. And no one listened to the whisper because you were shouting the rest of it so loud. And so if you're not going to give people 6 games again, you're going to continue to feed into this cycle of the NFL is inconsistent on punishing the harshest version of wrong that we see in these off-the-field issues.
I can't help but feel like in a world where the NFL and the NFLPA are finding something new to argue about every single week, though, the opportunity for the NFL to come in and say, we were tough on this, it was the player that came in, and the player and his people that came in and fought that it was too tough on it, they'll find a way to blame somebody else. I just think that it's easier to come in and have it reduced than it is to come in and find out that you just let somebody get away with it. That, on the public outcry, feels like the NFL isn't doing enough. At least that I see where they could save face there. We're going to continue the conversation, obviously, but there's other big NFL news that's happened since the last time Mike Golic Jr. and I got to hang out on radio. Obviously, the Lions gave a mega deal to Matt Stafford. The question is, was that the right thing to do? Are they going to regret doing it? And what's it mean for quarterbacks in the NFL? We'll break all that down next. It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Time, usually with Bomani Jones. But this week, it's The Right Time with Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. Phone number, 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776. All our guests get with us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. The Right Time is brought to you by Upside. Now save big on travel and get a big gift card every time you buy. You'll love Upside.com. Upside.com. Mike Golic Jr., Matt Stafford just signed a mega deal. How much upside does Matt Stafford have in your mind? Is he worth the kind of money they just gave him?
You're worth what you're willing, or what teams are willing to give you. Like, it's not a conversation about worth for me. Like, this is timing and this is the position. Now, you can talk about, is Matthew Stafford, I don't know, good enough to warrant this kind of contract? I mean, no, we all know that, but that's not what this is about.
I will say, though, as much as we say this is insane money for Matthew Stafford, a few years ago, and if you didn't see it yet, 5-year extension, and according to Shefty, it looks like it's $92 million guaranteed, which is higher guarantees than Andrew Luck got. It's higher per year than Derek Carr just got. The $50 million signing bonus that he's pulling in is higher than Luck got. It's higher than Carr got. It's a new benchmark quarterback contract. Just a few years ago, we were having a debate about whether or not Joe Flacco was worth the money that he has, and now, according to most numbers, he's the 7th highest paid quarterback. So he went from being the highest to the 7th highest paid in just a few years. So this conversation about what guys are worth, remember, it has so much to do about what year your contract comes up. You sign that contract today, he's the highest paid player in the NFL, but that's going to change quickly, not just because Kirk Cousins is up for a contract, but also several of the young quarterbacks that are going to come up in the next few years. That value is going to be dwarfed. So to me, I look at this Stafford situation and say, hey, we can throw out all the stats we want. At the end of the day, he's a quarterback in the NFL with the team that needs a quarterback that happened to have a contract that was ready to be signed at this period in time. So it's kind of right place, right time.
Yeah, and the numbers you're hinting at, people are going to point out he's 5-46 as a starter against teams that finished the season with a winning record, including 2-14 since 2015. Now, the easy counter to that is that making QB wins a stat that's a metric for measuring how good they are is kind of risky, because you know that you're not then giving credit, right or wrong, to the team that's around Matt Stafford, a team whose leading rusher last year rushed for under 500 yards in the season, whose offensive line has struggled a lot in the last few years, who has good receivers, like even with the departure of Calvin Johnson, having Golden and Marvin Jones, and the on down the list there. I mean, Eric Ebron's been not exactly stellar as they thought they would be at the draft spot at tight end, but having enough weapons around him, a healthy Amir Abdullah this year, but we know the defense as well needs work. Like, that's a bit disingenuous to just look at that record and go, ha, 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 what are they doing?
You mean a quarterback doesn't win and lose every single game? I can't believe it. This is revolutionary. I think that part of this, though, has to come from where the organization's been, especially at the quarterback position. And I think at some point, if you're a fan of a team that's had a terrible quarterback for the longest time, you'll overpay, and you'll gladly watch your team overpay for Matt Stafford. And I'll go back to, we just talked about Derek Carr. When you think about what the quarterback situation for the Raiders has been in most of my lifetime, it's been trash, okay? So with a few-year exception of Rich Gannon, the Raiders have not had good quarterback play for most of my lifetime. They finally get good quarterback play, they'll overpay for it. If you're the Lions and you finally have a quarterback, that means you don't have to dip back into the draft, you'll overpay for it. I think that the people that have a real hard time with this are people that are fans of teams that have had solid quarterback play year in and year out, and they just don't understand how desperate certain teams are to get a guy.
Or to keep a guy, because you're paying in large part for the problems that exist for the outside world, for the have-nots, and for what you want to do as an alternative with Matthew Stafford. Because what is the alternative? You try and trade Matthew Stafford and end up giving up way too much to get a quarterback that you think is better. You go out in free agency where you're going to have to pay this kind of price for a guy, and depending on who's coming up on the market, probably going to have to pay more, because someone was going to reset this. It just happened to be Matthew Stafford that reset this in advance of Drew Brees hitting the market, in advance of Aaron Rodgers coming up for a payday. All those young quarterbacks that you mentioned, Kirk Big Money Cousins, who's going to bust the bank wide open, because quarterbacks never hit free agency for a reason. You want to go to the draft? The Lions would have to trade a bunch of assets away in the draft to move up and get one of the great quarterbacks we know is coming out this year. All of those things that don't necessarily alleviate your cap situation, the way signing him to a long-term deal where you can spread the money out in a way that gives you the flexibility to re-sign Ziggy Ansah or maybe add better defensive pieces.
Do you worry about the amount of cap space that essentially these star quarterbacks are taking? Does it become a concern at some point, or does the cap just continue to grow at such a rate that nobody really cares?
Well, we've seen with a lot of teams, like Flacco's a good example of after that Super Bowl. And after a lot of teams, once you have to pay the quarterback, it gets increasingly harder to build a good team. That's why so many are trying to hit on that model that the Seahawks made so sexy. Now, granted, finding a quarterback in the third or fourth round isn't exactly a legitimate model you can always count on, but at least then you know, all right, while I've got this quarterback under rookie contract, knowing what these deals are, we got to get while the getting's good. But once you've got a quarterback that's a known commodity, it's hard to say, all right, we're going to go back out into that world of, yeah, maybe we can go and take the risk and find a guy who's better, but that's a pretty huge risk that doesn't necessarily guarantee you this on the back end.
He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. You can get in touch with us, by the way, through the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. He's at mGolic Jr. 57. I'm at Jason Fitz. And I'll go back to when you just, the quick Google search of the starting quarterbacks over the last 20 or so years. We'll say the last 30 years for the Detroit Lions. You're looking at Rodney Peete, Scott Mitchell, Charlie Batch, Joey Harrington, John Kitna, Dan Orlovsky, Dante Culpepper got in there for a little while. I mean, this is a team that they've got a solution. They've got somebody that's played at a high level statistically, and I think that there's a sort of a tipping point for every franchise. It's can this guy get us to whatever that next level is? And so fan bases will become impatient with the quarterback when he makes a ton of money and he can't seem to get them from the playoff caliber to a Super Bowl. Like fans will yell about that. These franchises, when you talk about a franchise like the Lions, they're just trying to get to the point where they can be viable year in and year out. And when you have a quarterback that's playing in the top half of the league on a team that's struggling to be viable consistently, you pay him. I mean, this is pretty simple to me. And I don't, not only do I think it's not going anywhere, I don't think it should go anywhere. I think this is exactly how the system should work. Pay the man.
Well, and as long as the system continues to work this way, because as long as you've got the human element in this that's tied with jobs, we know quarterbacks tend to be tied to coaches and tied to GMs and all the way down the list. And until you can change that conventional thinking that allows you to say, all right, this isn't working as well as we think it could, we'll try something new, and you dump a guy like Matt Stafford, that's how you lose a job. So as long as you've got that fear of your job security in place, you can't expect the system to leave it open for other avenues of solving the quarterback problem in the NFL.
You make a great point. How many coaches in the NFL right now would trip over each other just to get Matt Stafford as their quarterback so they can have a job next year? So we'll get thoughts on it from the NFL Nation guy that's covering all of it. Michael Rothstein is going to join us, ESPN Lions NFL Nation reporter. We'll get Michael's thought on it. We'll do that next up on The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. NFL fans will do almost anything to help their team win. Tostitos, the official chip and dip of the NFL, created lucky bags for select NFL teams this season. My God, that sounds amazing. I want one. They participated in team traditions with the hope that doing so would bring luck to each team. They raised a 12th man flag for the Seahawks. They waved the terrible towel for the Steelers bags and gave the Broncos bags a mile-high salute. Current NFL players Dak Prescott, Jadeveon Clowney, Joe Flacco, and Aaron Donald all participated to make their team's bags lucky. Visit Tostitos.com to see how Tostitos made your team's lucky bag and pick one up at a store near you.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. Right Time is brought to you by Select Quote. Free personalized quotes in just 10 minutes. Call 1-800-290-0303 or go to selectquote.com. All our guests get to us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. You know that. And we've been just talking about the massive contract that is given out to Matt Stafford. To help us break that down, the ESPN NFL Nation reporter Michael Rothstein joins us. Mike, thanks for your time, man. When you looked at this number, I know you knew the contract was coming, but when you looked at the number, did really any part of it surprise you?
The guarantee surprised me a little bit, honestly. I didn't think that he'd get that much in guaranteed money. But, hey, $92 million, that's not bad for anybody, really. I think anyone would take it at this point. That's the only thing that surprised me. The years were going to be 4 or 5 years. The dollar amount was going to be somewhere between 26 and 27 billion, it seemed like. And this really made sense. I know you guys were talking about it before. Really, it resets the market. But a year from now, 2 years from now, this is going to look like a bargain because he's going to be the 7th, 8th, 9th highest paid quarterback in the league instead of right now where he's sitting at number 1. I mean, his good buddy Matt Ryan is probably going to pass on here within the next 12 months, I would think. Drew Brees will. Kirk Cousins will, Aaron Rodgers will, and, so on and so forth.
Michael, when people will point to the team and say, well, they've got so many other needs, this is going to strap them. Is this a move that actually is going to allow them some wiggle room with the cap in the next few years?
Yeah, I haven't seen the exact way that the contract is broken down yet, so I can't say how much it's going to give it to them this year. But, yeah, it's going to give them more wiggle room. And I think I saw a number somewhere that it's going to be like 16.2% of the cap, and that's not a huge amount for a quarterback. And they've got a lot of other issues, but this allows them potentially to franchise tag Ezekiel Elliott next season and bring him back for one more year, depending what he looks like. And a little bit of other news, Bob Quinn, their GM, said that they expect him to play week 1. He has not practiced at all. He's been on PUP, so that's some good news for the Lions. But, yeah, they have some big issues on the offensive line, on the defensive line. Golden Tate could be due for an extension soon. So getting this done, knowing you have your quarterback, allows you to build your team around him, and it allows you to figure out what pieces work and then go from there. And that's the biggest thing for the Lions. They still have their quarterback, and they haven't had a quarterback this good since, I think our parents were maybe 6, 7 years old. We're talking the mid-1950s here with Bobby Lane, depending on really how much maybe you liked a guy like Eric Hipple or Scott Mitchell or someone like that. I mean, that's the quarterback history we're talking about in Detroit.
Talking to Michael Rothstein in the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. And Michael, the outside world seems enamored with things like Matthew Stafford's record against teams that finish the season with winning records and all these things that have come up to basically slight and undermine this deal in the public. Why is there such a problem in the public's eye with this contract and what seems to be their issue with Matt Stafford?
I think people like that number. What is it, 5-46? That's such a bad number. I was going to use the word bunk. It's a bunk number. And yes, it's an actual stat. But you have to remember, he took over as a quarterback of an 0-16 team. That team in 2008 was 0-16. Everybody was gone. Matt Millen was gone. The coaching staff was gone. They only have one player left on that team from the 2008 season, and that's their long snapper, Dom Muehlbach, and they tried even to get rid of him a couple years ago by drafting a long snapper. So that team was just so bad that there was a large rebuilding process. I think that part of the problem was that they actually had a decent amount of success in 2011. They made the playoffs almost solely off of Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson. And that kind of, I think, reset expectations. If they had gone 6-10 or 7-9 in 2011 and then went 9-7 and built up and then maybe made 3 playoff appearances in 4 years, I don't think people will be complaining as much about this. I think that they just see a guy who's been in the playoffs 3 times, and they're like, why would you pay this guy this amount of money when Tom Brady makes X amount of dollars and Aaron Rodgers makes X amount of dollars? And they don't think about the long-term play. They just see, oh, my God, it's $135 million. And, $135 million, let's be real. In the real-world scope of things, the NFL salaries are crazy. They just are. But it's what the going rate is. It's what the market rate is. It's what they're going to pay.
So we're talking to Michael Rothstein, ESPN NFL Nation reporter for the Lions. So, Mike, when you think about trying to judge who Stafford is as a quarterback, how much credit do you put on him in the last couple of years, and how much credit do you put on Jim Bob Cooter, the offensive coordinator that seemed to turn it all around for him?
Oh, listen, Jim Caldwell and Jim Bob Cooter did a great job of reining Stafford in. They gave him a couple of really big benchmarks to hit. Improve your completion percentage, cut down on your interceptions. That's what he's done under Caldwell and Cooter. His completion percentage every year has been higher than they were in previous years under Jim Schwartz. His interceptions, he threw a career-low 12 last year, and it would have probably been lower than that, except he was playing the last 3 games of the year, well, the last 4 games of the year, with a busted middle finger on his throwing hand, so it definitely affected him in that aspect. He has done exactly what they've asked him to do. He's become an efficient quarterback. Some of that is that he hasn't been throwing down the field as much. They've changed the offense a little bit, but a lot of that was tailored to Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford had input in that. So they've basically taken Matthew Stafford and turned him into a really good NFL quarterback. And I think that a lot of it is just he had this gunslinger mentality from when he threw for the 5,000-yard season in 2011, and people never really shook that. And he's turned into a pretty efficient quarterback. And more than anything else, he's the reason they made the playoffs last year. He's the reason that, yes, they started 1-7, but he's a big reason of why they rebounded to 7-9, why Jim Caldwell still has a job. Because he was the guy who led all these come-from-behind wins that we saw on television last year, or I saw them in person, you guys saw them on television. And if they don't have Matthew Stafford, they're probably a 5-win team last year. And people just maybe can't, I don't know if they don't realize that or can't realize that, or they don't want to put disproportionate amount of credit on Matthew Stafford, so they're taking some of that away from him. But it was Matthew Stafford and Matt Prater who played major roles last year in the Lions making the playoffs. And I think that, honestly, this is the right contract for him. And I've been somebody, if it's a bad deal, I would have said that from the jump. I think this is a good deal for the Lions and a good deal for Stafford.
You can read him on ESPN. Obviously, you can follow him on Twitter at Mike Rothstein. Michael Rothstein, ESPN NFL Nation reporter for the Lions. Thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, guys. Have a good show.
So, Golic, after hearing all that, you feel good about the contract?
I do. And again, this is an investment in their long-term success here over the next few years. This isn't a one-year thing. This isn't them franchise tagging and then having to figure it out. They've got stability in this area now. And then to his point, they can retool and refigure and worry about finding options and alternatives in other places where they're in much greater need of help.
Well, speaking of finding options and alternatives, that's what's being asked of everybody in sports right now with the events in Houston. The Astros and the Rangers, they're playing a home series now at Tropicana Field, but the Rangers are catching a lot of grief for it. We'll tell you why, and we'll tell you what happened next up. It's the right time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. You can get to us. 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776. You know ESPN Radio is always presented by Progressive Insurance. Mike Golic Jr. First, before we even get into this conversation, let's make sure that we stress what's important in the world today. Anytime having a conversation about Houston, there are things far more important than anything going on in the sports world or the sports community for that city, for the teams in that city. The most important thing is safety. Obviously, the amount of water, the amount of flooding that they're dealing with at this point is catastrophic, and it's the sort of thing. For me, living in Nashville dealt with a similar situation almost a decade ago, and it has forever changed the city. So I want to make sure before we say anything about sports that we take a second and acknowledge the important thing is that everybody be safe, get safe, have the opportunity to start whatever the recovery and rebuild process is going to be for Houston.
And I think it's very easy to accept, and everyone has across the board. We've even heard, as we'll get to the Astros and the Rangers talking about this, most of the players and the managers involved in this have echoed that thought that these guys are all worried about their family and friends that are back in Houston right now. As it's pointed out, many of the players and coaches for the Rangers have family and friends that are in that area as well, and everyone is just worried about making sure that their people are okay, and all of this baseball stuff will take a backseat to every sports element to this conversation will take a rightful backseat to this.
I also, one thing that will always stick in my mind about the flood for Nashville is that I was touring a ton at that time. So I got home the day that the flood really hit, and our house suffered a lot of damage. But then I had to go back out on the road. Like there was no option. So I was back out touring, and it's amazing how you're out on the road and you're trying to figure out how to call all the insurance people and the electricians and all the people that have to be called, but then also trying to figure out how to balance real life. What was damaged? What have you lost? Like this is going to be a very difficult time for the athletes that live in these cities or have families in these cities to even figure out how to focus on their jobs, because real life becomes very heavy. Now, that being said, the Astros and the Rangers are going to play their next series at Tampa Bay's Tropicana Field after the flooding hit. They moved it. The series starts Tuesday. And what at first sounded like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. There's been a point now where people are in a little bit of an uproar. The Astros are considered to be the home team, and they originally wanted to go in and make a switch, essentially. And the Rangers said no. They came back and said, no, they don't want to change a later series and just flop these things around. It feels like Neighbors not playing nice in the sandbox. What did you think when you first heard it?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that simple. And, the Astros president, Ryan Reed, told reporters that they went to the Rangers and wanted to flip that series. The Rangers said their GM, John Daniels, told reporters that essentially they didn't think it was fair to fans who had bought tickets for this series that would have been played September 25th through 27th, and said in a day's notice that they're moving that series up to this weekend. And the Rangers would be on the road for 4 of the last 5 series to finish the season. And that was the line they felt on. And he emphasized that they weren't looking for a competitive advantage in all of this, which actually, to me, if you're looking at a way and you're saying, listen, our team has got things, it has goals for our season that we're trying to focus on, and we believe it would diminish them, that would be outside of all of everything else, maybe the most reasonable thing to point out with, because I doubt fans in this are going to really raise up arms and say, oh, look at how inconvenienced we are having to go to this game at a different time, whilst our neighbors and people that we very directly can see the effects of are dealing with all these atrocities. So that logic to me kind of falls short of anything I can believe.
Well, and you and I had the opportunity to work together last year in college football, and we watched an instance where they had to go in and postpone the LSU Florida game. And there was a point that because of the hurricane, they weren't sure where it was going to be played, how it was going to be played. A lot of controversy about how that could have been handled better. But ultimately, I think part of what I learned in that process is that no matter how much we think we've got it all sorted out, not just us, I mean we as in everyone, as much as you think, okay, I've got it sorted out and there's some pieces here that make sense, when you actually get into the real life process of trying to figure out what's best for everybody, how everybody can get what they want and what they need and still be protected is very complicated. I mean, how many of us were flipping out one way or the other about LSU Florida being postponed and whether or not, and they're conspiracy theorists about who was somebody trying to get a creative an edge in this process. You look at it and say there's no easy solution. When Mother Nature gets involved, there's just no easy solution in sports.
Well, and for most people, the easy solution would have just been to flip this and say that, all right, we'll play the Astros series this weekend. We'll flip it around on the back end, because really the advantage for that is that the fans in Houston get to see this game back on their turf when this is all said and done, and we can talk about the potential for sports to be a respite in ways that we've seen at times after tragedies, to bring people back together, to give them a minute to truly, like you talked about in the world of escapism in sports, in a live setting there after everything they'll have gone through, to just be able to go out and sit and watch a baseball game in their home stadium at that point would have been probably something tremendously helpful and satisfying in that. But again, You have to ask yourselves that, yes, altruism would be nice on the part of the Rangers and that organization, but is it required, knowing what it would put their team through on the other side?
And that's an interesting question, because you're right. I mean, the escapism guy in me loves the concept of being able just to go watch a baseball game and get away. But you're also asking somebody in that process to make a sacrifice, and we just presume that's what's going to be done. But I think that's an unfair presumption to make. There are more layers to the business side of sports than we ever want to acknowledge. I mean, that's been part of the theme even in talking about Stafford and talking about Ezekiel Elliott. Like there's a business side to sports that we have to keep in the back of our minds at some point. It means something even in these situations. So it's not an easy situation. Coming up next, Paul Feinbaum on Mike and Mike this morning said FSU Bama, not as big a game as some might think. We'll tell you what he meant. Bomani Jones, Right Time.
Thanks for listening to the Right Time Podcast. Please come back tomorrow for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Okay, keep your eyes closed.
Okay.
I want to show you my first ever painting.
All right.
Okay. Open your eyes.
Oh, that's a lot of colors.
Mm-hmm.
And shapes.
So be honest. What do you think?
Well, I like how if you switch to Geico, you could save hundreds of dollars on car insurance.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Here, why don't I hold your paintbrush while you call them?
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
What if I told you all it took was a pair to win it all?
Phil Ivey, the most famous gambler in the world, was accused of cheating casinos of multiple millions of dollars.
Ivy and a female accomplice.
My name is Chang Sam. Everybody call me just Kelly.
Kelly's son is probably the most dangerous match player in the world right now.
The all-new 30 for 30 podcast. Subscribe now on the ESPN app or Apple Podcasts.
30 for 30 podcast is presented by Mini. We're finding the best sports stories for you right now. And to do that, we're behind the wheel of the new Mini Countryman, the biggest Mini yet.
Please proceed to the highlighted route.
To find great sports stories, you have to get out into the world and follow your instincts. That's where the new Mini Countryman's all-wheel drive comes in handy. With all four, we can chase down a story in the city, the country, and most places in between. No matter what story you're chasing, the new Mini Countryman will help you find it. It's available now, and so are 30 for 30 podcasts.
Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. The Right Time, ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance. You can hang out with us. 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776. And you can also get in touch with us through the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. At MGolic Jr. 57.
That's the one.
At Jason Fitz. Much easier. And so, Mike Golic Jr. and I got to work together for the first time a year ago. Today was our first show we ever did together. It was a little college football show on ESPNU. And so it's fitting that a year later we get to come back together and talk about a little college football, because this is a huge opening weekend. And it's huge because one has never taken on three. This is the biggest matchup we've ever had. Number 1, Alabama, taking on number 3, Florida State, would be, by AP ranking, the biggest matchup we've ever had to open a college football season. So we start to look at it, and I have to ask you, first and foremost, Mike, when you think about it, Are you? For me, I'm so excited for college football season. I feel like they could have put any game on and I'd watch it. So the fact that we're actually getting viable, interesting, big-name teams playing each other actually has me a little bit over the moon. Like, I don't even know how to handle the excitement that I have the week before the NFL season because college football has built this thing so perfectly.
Well, yeah, we're not used to seeing this because it didn't used to always be this way. You would get a couple of the warm-up games. You would get games like South Florida playing San Jose State or Stanford playing Rice and things that were kind of easy and palatable and a good way for everyone to get rolling into the season. But as we've heard come up this offseason with Nick Saban, one of the parties involved, as we saw start to become a meaningful trend in playing big games early the way Oklahoma and Ohio State did last year, it's something that's increasingly more valuable to teams in this college football playoff era, but certainly has been something that Alabama themselves has been a part of a lot of times in recent history in these big early season kickoff games. See last year with them versus a USC team that was a shell of what it ended up becoming, but it was at least a bigger name than playing North Dakota or Louisiana Monroe in the first week of the season.
Well, for me, my world is pretty simple. In my college football America, I want to see Florida State and Alabama play today. This weekend, I want to see Florida State and Alabama then play for the national championship at the end of the year because I think it's fantastic to just have the whole bookended story and have it all work together. But Paul Feinbaum came on. He was on the Paul Feinbaum show. Actually, he was on Mike and Mike, and he talked about the fact that Florida State and Bama really isn't as big a game as we think. This is what Feinbaum had to say.
I don't see this game having the kind of consequences that other major games have had because we're used to these games in the middle of the season, at the end of the season. This game, if Alabama loses, we'll make an argument that they can still get back in it, and the same for FSU. I mean, who would have a better loss all year long, assuming Alabama does what we think they will do? So I'm not taking anything away from the game. Certainly the hype has been endless, but I think there will be more important games later in the year. We just haven't had one like this.
And I don't disagree that they're going to have the opportunity to rebound from it. That doesn't make it less of a big game. I mean, it can be a big game and not necessarily mean that the loser is completely out of the national championship, right?
It's sort of the same discussion we had yesterday, just with different words, talking about a fight is either good or entertaining. And depending on your metric, the answer becomes different. If you want to talk about long-lasting impact, then yeah, we've seen teams be able to overcome early season losses a lot of times. And knowing the potential for both these teams to win a lot of the rest of their games on the schedule and still end up in the promised land, yeah, it's not going to have the same impact. You won't have coaches playing for their lives the way you can potentially have with Texas A&M and UCLA or other situations like that, but it's still going to be the best, at least where we sit now, collection of talent on the fields going into the season.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think ultimately entertaining is the theme of this opening weekend. And that's what I think college football has done particularly well. And it's not just with this matchup, it's with other things. So when you talk about Michigan versus Florida, when you talk about Tennessee versus Georgia Tech, you can go up and down the line. There are big matchups between really good teams, not just this weekend, but next weekend. They've done a good job of giving us sort of a little bed to get us excited. And they can let everybody stand up and have the supposedly entertaining argument over which conference is best that drives me crazy. You can have all of these discussions because they put landmark brand name franchises against each other in this sense where they can come out and brands can battle each other. That's the appeal to the weekend to me. It's not so much that the games are going to be fantastically played. They may not be. And it doesn't even have to mean that it has long-term consequence to the national championship. It just means I want to see big brands open up the college football season. That's what I'm getting.
Well, that's what you had, but I guess to Paul's point, and something I can see a little bit more, is that we also don't know that this is going to be a good game. Like, we can predict it as best we can, and judging by the amount of talent on the field on both sides of these ones and the guys that they've got returning, it's a safe bet to assume it will be, but we had big brands and ranked teams. Alabama, USC last year is a perfect example in a different vein because USC got beat into the ground, but ended up finding a change in quarterback and all these other things that if you had those teams play later in the season when Sam Darnold USC was around, it would have been a markedly more entertaining game. And so to the point is, yeah, week one, this is all about the buildup. The AP really dropped the ball on this, right?
They failed us.
Like, you could have had 1 versus 2 if you just decided, all right, it's week 1. The most inconsequential rankings of the season when you're talking about 1 or 2 spots, and you could have given us 1-2 in week 1. That hype train would have been unreal. Now, is it splitting hairs? Yeah, but it would have been a nice visual, and I'm kind of mad at them.
No, it's not splitting hairs at all. They stole my entertainment. I wanted the hype, right? I want 1 versus 2, week 1. And then at the end, you have the rematch for the national championship. This worked out perfectly in my movie script mind, okay? I had this all worked out. Alabama, Florida State, whoever wins it in week 1 obviously loses the national championship. It's the whole redemption story. We could have had it all in the Associated Press, which, let's face it, in a playoff committee world, the AP's it's not quite as significant as it used to be. Let's say it that way. They could have just let us have this. Let us have this special moment. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, and even, like, I don't even need it as far as the rematch on the back end, because we know a million things can happen in college football season. Like, the minute you think that all the commodities that we're buying stock in right now at the beginning of the year are going to hold fast and true all the way through the season, like, you don't often get a season like last year where Alabama and Clemson start the season coming off of a national championship berth, and we get to look forward and say, all right, the chances of the rematch are pretty strong here, and then it ends up delivering in a way that we didn't believe would be possible. Like, I think the last couple of years are going to ruin expectations for a while about what we think is possible in the world of college football.
But here's the one thing I would say. I would come back to that and say, at some point, the entertainment factor of college football is partially because it's becoming very easy to look at certain teams and say, okay, these teams are going to be competitive. And Reese Davis said it a few weeks ago, that there's a shelf between the top 3 and everybody else. So in this particular year, in the opinion of some smart college football minds, there is number 1, Alabama, number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Florida State, and then everybody else. Okay? So if that's the case, and you're looking at this delineation between all of them, then I can look at it and say, okay, if they are really good, and this is a great opening week matchup, this was the one year I had a shot at getting. I don't want your version either. I want the whole thing to be bookended, just so that we can say it happened. And then in the future, you every time it will be, wow, you haven't seen 1 versus 2 since then. And that's sort of my thought on it. You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. You guys can always chime in. Rich from Rochester. Rich, what do you got?
I say that every game, when you're talking about a 11, 12-game season, to say that a game is not important, especially when you're talking about teams at this level, it is. Whoever loses a game, if they win out, they're still going to be in the hunt. So I don't understand this thing of saying that a game is inconsequential. I mean, USC, don't forget they lost 3 games early. So not only the Alabama game, but they lost those other 2 games. All these games are important. I think we downplay them too much. It's not a game that's not important.
Rich, thanks for the call, man. But what you just said is the reason why Paul is saying it's not important, because fact is, if Alabama gets smoked in this game, I mean, if they just get beat, but they turn around and they run the table from there and they win the SEC and they're a 1-loss SEC team, they're going to the playoff. And if they go to the playoff, they have a shot at a national championship. So this particular game isn't eliminating somebody from the opportunity to win at all.
No, and we know how the game goes in college football, that early season losses are not treated equally with their late season comparison, and rightly so, because you're not the fully formed version of yourself on a team built on the backs of 18 to 23-year-olds. You're hopefully on the top end going to look better in November than you do in September, and so grading on the same scale for losses and the things that you see off a team in those time periods is not the right way to go about things. So I always understand when people look at a late season collapse from some team and say, well, so-and-so lost early in the season, why aren't you holding them to the same standards? It's because you shouldn't.
Well, speaking of standards that everyone's being held to, we'll switch gears, get to the NFL. Ezekiel Elliott, his appeal being heard today. Jerry Jones has he's dug his heels in. He's made a statement. He's made a strong statement that could result in egg on his face. We'll tell you what he said, what it could mean. We'll do it next. It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. The Right Time is brought to you by Firestone Complete Auto Care, keeping cars running newer, longer. Whatever you drive a Firestone. So Jerry Jones has dug his heels in. And there are different ways different owners handle situations. We obviously know Jerry Jones loves to be loved by his players, and he seems to have a very special bond with them as a result. That's fine. It's a stylistic thing. At some point, you look at it as a boss and say, we've all had different kinds of bosses. Bosses that you know always have your back, and bosses that you know never have your back, and then the ones that are somewhere in the middle. Jerry Jones definitely has made a statement about where he is on Ezekiel Elliott when he came out and said this. Okay, he said this on 105.3 The Fan in Dallas on Tuesday. He said, unfortunately, you get confused in this conversation. Every person that has any sense at all understands domestic violence and abhors it. On the other hand, I've had a lot of evidence and experience in this area. For 10 years before I bought the Cowboys, I was the head of battered women of Arkansas. I raised more money and been in more safe houses than a lot of people that talk about it. So it's a terrible problem. On the other hand, what we are today and what we're trying to be relative to addressing it in the league has all kinds of issues, and it should. It's a very complicated issue because, this is the key part of this, you have no evidence here. So Jerry Jones doesn't just say, hey, I got you. We stand behind Ezekiel Elliott. He's stating, I understand the issues that battered women face. I understand how awful domestic violence is, and I also understand we have no evidence here. You can't walk back from that statement.
Well, no, and this relative to the rest of the reaction that we've heard either directly from or reported on with Jerry Jones seems to be tame. I mean, he was one that came out, and all reports indicated when this ruling was first originally passed was someone that was fuming at the notion that he was going to be without Ezekiel Elliott for 6 games based on what he believes was now no evidence in their findings on what he's done. And so it puts you firmly in a place that if you're Jerry Jones, you didn't need to be as the head of an organization, because now you're right. You've linked yourself to this very firmly and directly. And while if you're in Zeke Elliott's camp, this may be endearing to have an owner that's so willing to be publicly on your side in all this, if you're an owner, you put yourself in a very tough position now to be on the wrong side of the wrong issue to be on the wrong side of.
Wow, that was really well said. I followed that whole thing at the end. That was well done by you, Mike Golic Jr. I think you're right, absolutely. And the interesting part about it is, at some point, what do we know about today's world, right? Like, nothing stays secret forever. So at some point, we're going to get this evidence. Whatever this evidence is that the NFL has, or that Ezekiel Elliott has, or that the Cowboys feel like they have, whatever evidence there is, we're eventually going to get. And when we get it, it's either going to, in one hand, it's going to say, hey, Ezekiel Elliott did nothing, and the NFL looked at this and totally was unfair, or it's going to turn around and say, hey, Ezekiel Elliott did something. And when you say you have no evidence here, you're not even allowing something to be a category anymore. He's looking at it. Jerry Jones is looking at it and saying, you have no evidence. That means he thinks there's literally nothing there that they can sort of associate with Ezekiel Elliott. If that's even slightly untrue, then he looks terrible. I mean, he looks awful in this situation as somebody, especially that has been an advocate for battered women.
Well, and you can look at it in comparison again because of all the legal ramifications, and only there to what we saw in Deflategate. And the stakes for being wrong there were a lot lower than the stakes for being wrong now, because both sides have eventually called the bluff of the other side. You've called into question the word and the integrity of the people making decisions and making choices on both sides of the fence. So there's no middle ground in this anymore. And for Jerry Jones and someone in that position who tends to respond emotionally in a lot of different senses and make decisions based on that in a lot of different areas we've seen, from the draft room to areas like this where he seems to run with emotions, it puts you in a spot where you needn't be. Because all you have to do is come out and give the very stock answer of, you can still support your player without throwing your character and your word behind it really in the way that Jerry Jones has. And he's avoided that. And you can say it's admirable to stand with your player, but man, it just seems like a misstep to me in the end.
You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz, ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance. And the thing about it is, we can question and have questioned for years some of the football moves of Jerry Jones. One thing that I think you have to look at some point is the business side of Jerry Jones. And the fact is, he just does business better than most NFL owners. He's smarter with business than most human beings. There's certain guys that above and beyond whatever their sports legacy is, their business legacy matters. And many will argue that it's the business legacy of Jerry Jones that actually has him now in the NFL Hall of Fame. That business legacy says he's smart. And when you're smart at business, you know what you're saying. That's why I have such a hard time in this situation with this verbiage. I mean, you're not leaving any sort of, we don't think there's conclusive evidence. We don't think that this has been linked. We think that the punishment was over the top. He's not saying any of those things. When you just come out and flatly say you have no evidence, especially when you're as smart in business and life as Jerry Jones has proven himself to be, it's either a huge misspeak that he can't recover from in that sense. It's either a huge misspeak, or you turn around and say he knows exactly what he's saying, in which case you have to say, what the heck is the NFL thinking? There's no room for an in-between here at this point.
No, there's not. But to the point you made, you can be smart in business. You can have a lot of those elements on your resume, but that doesn't automatically make you qualified to speak in this realm, specifically on these matters. Like, I get he's got a history of helping and giving to this cause, but I'd say it's a little more different than dealing with the nuances of a legal system that's flawed in a lot of senses on its own. The right thing he says in here is that this has all kind of issues as it relates to how the league deals with it. And that's a larger point that we've talked about, is the league acting as an extrajudiciary force in a lot of this, has its own complicated legs that have come up now. And that's the double-edged side of the sword that comes with the NFL getting all the power that it has, that comes with Roger Goodell getting the ability to punish in this regard without necessarily having proof and backing from the law. And on the other side saying, well, the law doesn't always get this angle right either, doesn't always get issues of domestic violence right. And whose responsibility is it? Is the responsibility of a very public and very prominent league to come out and make a stand on that the way it seems like sometimes we demand of it.
And while I agree that just because you're good in business, it doesn't mean that you necessarily understand this issue and the complications of this issue. You don't get to Jerry Jones' status without understanding the importance of using the appropriate words when making the appropriate statements. And that's the part of it.
You don't think it can make you bulletproof, though, on the other side of this, that you've gotten to this point and you believe that you've done it on the backs of your own doing and you being right about everything, and it makes you believe that you can be wrong about nothing?
And that, a God complex is a possibility, yes. But when you come out and you make sort of the statement that you have no evidence, you are making the statement, you're making a bold statement that you understand. Even if you don't understand the law, you understand the power of the words that you're using in that situation. That's what bothers me about it. Like, he has to understand the power of the words he's using in his negotiation, which is essentially what he's doing in this statement in general. He also has to understand that whatever the league does, it does partially because he helped vote for it. So whatever the league turns around and does, whatever Roger Goodell's actions are, he's part of the committee that not is extending his contract. He's part of the committee that approves of Roger Goodell's actions. I mean, he's a part of the NFL that has created this very system. So the usage of there's no evidence here, even if he doesn't understand the evidence, that's the part that I can't wrap my head around. Shireen Williams from Pro Football Talk, one of the biggest Cowboys experts I know. Shireen's going to join us up next. We'll get her thoughts on Jerry Jones' comments and her thoughts on this process where it lies right now. We'll do that next up. It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. Like I've been telling you for a while, 24 hours at least. If you travel for business, stop wasting time pricing your flights at hotels at the same old sites you used to go to. Use only the one site you need, Upside.com. It's quick and easy for Upside to show you the exact flights you're looking for and the big-name hotels you want to stay at. You can buy them separately or bundle them together. The more you bundle, the more you save, the bigger the gift card you receive to places like Amazon.com. Every time you buy a business travel package using Upside, their concierge level of service, second to none. You get the VIP treatment while still paying low prices. And their expert navigators are always available 24/7 through phone, chat, social, and email to help anytime. Upside's the real deal for buying your business trips. You got to give them a try. And right now, when you use promo code Bomani, you're guaranteed to get at least a $100 Amazon.com gift card on your package purchase. That's code is Bomani to get a $100 gift card free. Upside.com, the better way to buy business travel. Minimum purchase required. See site for complete details.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. You guys can chime in. 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776. ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance. We'll compare rates for you so you get the best deal, even if it's not with us, saving you time and money. Now, that's Progressive. Call or click today. So To get the most progressive coverage possible, joining us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line from Pro Football Talk, one of my favorites and one of the best Cowboys minds I know, Shireen Williams. Shireen, thanks for taking some time to hang out with us. Jerry Jones came in and said there's absolutely no evidence at this point. How much is he putting himself on the line by saying that and backing Ezekiel Elliott as strong as he is?
Oh, absolutely he is. And I think he's believed that from day one, and he believes the NFL doesn't have enough evidence to warrant a suspension, and he doesn't think Ezekiel Elliott should have been suspended. So he's going to feel that way, and he's going to feel that way even if this appeal is not overturned. But, we're going to see how that thing plays out.
Shireen, as far as the decision by Jerry Jones to be as strongly in the corner of Ezekiel Elliott he has, what's the upside to that play and not just coming out with sort of the stock line of we'll support our player and wait to see what the results of the appeal are?
Well, I think because he really believes that Ezekiel Elliott did nothing wrong. And I think he believes that Ezekiel Elliott should not be suspended. And obviously he doesn't want him suspended. He wants him out there on week 1. And so I think he's going to continue to try to push for that and put pressure on the commissioner and Harold Henderson not to suspend him and to do away with that suspension. Now, that's not going to happen. But I think that's his intent now, is to put that pressure on them to say, hey, he didn't do anything wrong here. He hasn't done anything wrong, and you guys are punishing him for something he didn't do.
So, Shireen, and we're talking to Pro Football Talk, Shireen Williams, help me wrap my head a little bit around the logic here then, because they're speaking in such vague terms, both sides really. At some point, if this is what the Cowboys believe, if it's what Jerry Jones believes, why not just bring whatever they have out to the public and win the battle of public opinion?
Well, there is that question, absolutely. I keep telling people, I keep going on and people keep saying, well, what do you think? I don't know. We haven't seen the evidence as you stated, Jason.
I think we lost Shireen. We had her there for a minute, and I think she makes a good point. None of us know kind of what's going on, and that's part of the difficulty of this situation, right? We're trying to figure it out based on all of these statements being made, but nobody's really showing us any of the evidence that backs the statements they're making.
Yeah, and I guess, and maybe the point, because I was having a conversation on Twitter with a couple of people, and to Shireen's point, yes, we don't know a lot about this situation. The thing that I wondered, and the reason I asked that question to her, is because I don't see, and maybe it is that outward pressure of saying, we believe our side is so definitively right, maybe that sways people in a way that could constitute an advantage to him being as overt in his support as he is. Because on my end, if you're talking about what you show to the player maybe as support, I think you can do that behind the scenes, and I think just by saying we support our guy and we're going to support him through this appeals process and leaving it at that, you put yourself at a lot less unnecessary risk on the back end of, to your point, looking really bad when the outcome comes, because the people in this and their character are going to likely be judged largely on the outcome of this, even if it's not quite as simple as just the suspension or not and deeming that guilt.
Well, and in that sense, Mike, I feel like the court of public opinion, it's difficult in that court to split hairs on these sorts of things in general. So the thought that there's not enough evidence is far different than there isn't any evidence. You know what I mean? And I realize that statement may not feel different to when you're just hearing it flippantly, but when you start to think about what it means for Jerry Jones to come in, if at some point the evidence is released and there's some evidence, but it's circumstantial or there's evidence and they're constantly saying, yeah, but it could have been this or it could have been that, you end up essentially splitting hairs on domestic violence in the court of public opinion. That's not an easy thing to do. That's not a good look for anybody in the process.
No, it's not. And even within the statement he made, there's a difference between saying that there's no evidence that supports this and he didn't do anything wrong. Although looking back over the course of this, I'm trying to look and see if there are any points in time, because Jerry Jones has spoken out a lot about this. If he's hinted at along the way and said, we believe that Ezekiel Elliott did nothing wrong, because that to me is the biggest and would be the most damning in all of this, for you to throw your hat in on that side of this and say, not only is there not evidence to condemn him in this way, but we believe that there was no wrongdoing on the part of Ezekiel Elliott, which again is an entirely different vein as we move through the tiers of this, because you're right. I think there are a lot of tiers to this, and ultimately an area where information is the one thing that's really left out.
Well, and it still sort of stuns me for Jerry Jones to make that definitive of a statement, he must believe he's going to win. I mean, he must believe that not just win, and I don't mean win the appeal. I mean win the public appeal, because that matters to every. This is business. This is marketing. That matters in this process. I think that he has to look at it and feel really confident in what they have and their ability to sort of show a different side of Ezekiel Elliott, because he's putting his own reputation on the line. That is always until we see the information, all you can look at is and say that's the stunning part to me, that he's putting his reputation on the line for Zeke.
Yeah, because to that point, going back and finding it at the Cowboys' annual news conference kickoff at training camp, opening that up. So this is back in has to be back in July then, when camp was opening up. Jerry Jones came out and said that there's, quote, absolutely nothing that I've seen that has to do with domestic violence as in regards to Ezekiel Elliott and this case. So that's the strong statement. Again, there's a difference between that and then just saying there's no evidence to give this kind of suspension to the guy on my team.
By the way, you can follow Shireen to keep up with information from her at NFL Shireen. Shireen Williams always does a great job. We do appreciate her taking the time to join us. There's a real conversation we have to have here too about what this means, and what this means for the Cowboys long term. Plus, you guys can chime in. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. What do you guys think of the investigation, the way it's going down? And when we come back, I want to get your thoughts on what all of this means for the Cowboys in their attempt to get to the playoffs and try and be a Super Bowl caliber team. We'll do that next. The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
I'm with Bomani Jones. Hurts my heart to talk over superstition. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
You could have let it breathe for a second. You didn't have to talk right over it.
Well, no, there's like a point where that's the right spot to come in on that. You know, it felt right. It felt right.
Felt right to you. Don't speak for both of us. Don't claim to know what I felt was right.
My bad. ESPN Radio presented by Progressive Insurance. And so before we get into this, because I want to ask you, Mike, what you think this is actually going to result in on the field for the Cowboys. We're having such a conversation about it. We forget sometimes that there's actually a product on the field that will be affected by it. But we love it when you guys chime in. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. However, one of you wants to keep calling but doesn't want to come on air and says I'm missing the point. So I want to address the 2 points that just so you start leaving everybody back in the studio that's working hard. Okay, so first point that I apparently don't get is the cops didn't find enough to charge Ezekiel Elliott. So let me address that out of the gate, that the NFL collective bargaining agreement actually stipulates that they don't have to take into consideration whether or not charges were filed. And the letter to Ezekiel Elliott from the league specifically stated that, quoting the domestic abuse policy, that even if there aren't charges filed, the league can still decide if there's enough there to warrant their own action. So the players already agreed to a collectively bargained piece that comes in and says, hey, whether or not charges are filed doesn't matter. So we could just crumple that up and throw that away. The second part of it is that the NFL, the piece that apparently I'm missing, is the NFL knows that she was trying to the victim in this situation was trying to blackmail Ezekiel Elliott, and that's part of what they're trying to hide. Also not true, because the NFL specifically acknowledges in their findings that they're aware of that, and they essentially say they don't care. The other part of it is they don't have to care. They can do whatever they want, completely autonomous of the legal system. So they found enough evidence in their own world with their own investigators from their own interviews to make these claims, and that's where the suspension comes from. And whether you think it's right or wrong based on the judicial system doesn't matter, because it doesn't play into this at all.
Well, and to that point, them having that in the document and going against what that would imply doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care, but it means that what they believe they found, the testimony that they've heard from her, the pictures that they claim to have, and whatever evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, they've gathered up is enough for them to say, all right, knowing this and knowing what we also believe we know on our end, we believe that it is enough to say that this is not affecting what we've got on our side. So you've got two sides that have very much drawn a line in the sand.
And you said it better in that sense. I shouldn't say they don't care. I should say that it factored in and they still came to their ruling. They factored in the fact that no charges were filed, and they still came to their ruling. They factored in the blackmail allegations, and they that's still, again, despite that still did not affect their ruling. So the NFL's looked at all of that and still came to the 6-game conclusion. So, Golic, what do you think? I mean, at this point, can the Cowboys survive a 6-game suspension from Ezekiel Elliott?
I think from a team standpoint, I think so, just because, and a lot of that's going to hinge on what you believe year 2 Dak Prescott looks like. That's really what most of this comes down to, because he's going to be asked to carry a larger burden on this team than he would have been asked to otherwise. We know Darren McFadden's going to be the guy filling in large portion for a while now, and the Cowboys team of a few years ago, I know it gets said often on this show, but he's finally putting it together and becoming the running back that everyone believed he could be. And I don't expect as much of that, but I think it's an interesting collection of circumstance, because the Cowboys' offensive line, while they're great, and they have those 3 great pillars in Frederick, Zach Martin, and Tyron Smith to build around, lost Doug Free and lost Ronald Leary in this offseason, one to retirement and one to free agency. And it's going to be a new-look group, and continuity and that sort of connectedness on the offensive line are thing that matters. And if you're going to tell me that Zeke missing the first 6 games of the season as opposed to the last 6 games of the season is a markedly better scenario for the Cowboys in a football sense, because he comes back 6 games in when that offensive line has had time to get a cohesiveness back together, and all of a sudden he can come in and, in theory, hit the ground running.
I love that you brought it back to the offensive line. We want to get everybody updated. The appeals hearing for Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott will continue for a second day on Wednesday. The story was first reported by the NFL Network and confirmed by ESPN. So remember, of course, that we are not expecting an immediate ruling. We're just letting you know that at this point, the hearing will continue for a second day. When you talk about those first 6 opponents, you are talking about the Texans, Giants, Broncos. You're talking about some good defenses there. The Packers would be in those first 6 opponents. You are talking about, obviously, a difficult situation to ask. And you mentioned earlier, I think, the key piece in this, which is the development of Dak. And at this point, we're just sort of presuming that Dak develops from year 1 to year 2, and that there's no hitch, and that the loss of Ezekiel Elliott is something he can easily get through. I don't know that it's that simple. I always get nervous about a quarterback, not just year 1 to year 2, but year 2 to year 3. I think there are stages of development that have to happen. I think this is putting a lot more on Dak. So it makes me nervous for that reason. We don't know what Dak is when there's no Ezekiel Elliott. For anybody, it's kind of like this conversation here. We just don't know. We just don't know what that's going to look like.
No, but if you play out all of the traditional cliches about quarterback to their absolute end and say, well, the biggest jump for a player, any player, but especially a quarterback, is supposed to be between year 1 and year 2, that would be a feather in his cap. A lot of the development you saw later in the season, they expanded the playbook for him and put more on his plate and allowed him to pass downfield, assuming now that you've still got a full complement of your weapons too outside of that with the guys on offense, then you can, in theory, say, all right, this is in line for him to be able to perform better and have more available to him outside of that coming out of the gate.
Yeah, I mean, it just always makes me nervous, because there was a period where we thought RG3 was going to be, absolutely untouchable. And I realize injury becomes part of that situation, but I'll date myself as being an old man. I mean, Rick Meyer at one point was supposed to be the future at quarterback. 1 year is obviously significant, but I still need to see more. I need to see more than that before I'm comfortable.
I guess the thing for me, too, is a lot of our expectation was built on how much they won. But Dak's numbers and the numbers in that Dallas passing offense weren't near the top of the league. They weren't anything that blew us away. So there's room for improvement even just in that without the burden of expectation of the wins.
Oh, you mentioned passing numbers. Matthew Stafford, he's put up some big numbers. And as a result of putting up all those big numbers, Stafford just got himself paid. We'll tell you about it. Was it the right choice? We'll do that next on The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz on ESPN Radio.
Thanks for listening to The Right Time podcast. Please come back tomorrow for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Okay, keep your eyes closed.
Okay.
I want to show you my first ever painting.
All right.
Okay. Open your eyes.
Oh, that's a lot of colors and shapes.
So be honest. What do you think?
Well, I like how if you switch to Geico, you could save hundreds of dollars on car insurance.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Here, why don't I hold your paintbrush while you call them?
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
What if I told you Some stories you need to hear to believe.
It was the rivalry of the hammer and the nail, and Boston was the nail.
You would hear Yankee suck at a funeral, Yankee suck at a football game.
The second we said Yankee suck t-shirts, people just crowded around us and bought them as fast as we could sell them.
The all-new 30 for 30 podcast. Subscribe now on the ESPN app or Apple Podcasts.
30 for 30 podcast is presented by Mini. We're finding the best sports stories for you right now. And to do that, we're behind the wheel of the new Mini Countryman, the biggest Mini yet.
Please proceed to the highlighted route.
To find great sports stories, you have to get out into the world and follow your instincts. That's where the new Mini Countryman's all-wheel drive comes in handy. With all four, we can chase down a story in the city, the country, and most places in between. No matter what story you're chasing, the new Mini Countryman will help you find it. It's available now, and so are 30 for 30 podcasts.
Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. ESPN Radio presented by Progressive Insurance. And Mike, I don't know about you, but I woke up today thinking, wish I could have been a quarterback. I think I could have made a heck of an NFL quarterback. I got the gift, right? Like 5'9", 5'9.5", 160 pounds. I was draftable.
When they do those ideal draft profiles and they break down each position and they say at the absolute physical best, forgetting a lot of the intangible features and stuff like that, what would you want in your given player? And they'll break them down. A quarterback, offensive lineman, you have a guard to be like 310. They want the big bubble butt. They want a lot of these different features. Mm-hmm. You are probably the antithesis of what the quarterback picture looks like in the book.
So you're saying if I went in and made my, back in the old days, I don't know if you young whippersnappers still do this, but you get Madden and you go out and you create yourself. And in Madden, if I created myself, you don't think that 5'9", 165, you don't think I'd get a very good rating?
Yeah, that's sort of like the opposite day thing. Like if you were playing opposite day, yeah, that would be great, and that would probably play very well. But outside of that, you're up the creek, so to speak.
Well, if you're playing Madden mode, your cap number just got a little more difficult with Matt Stafford because he signs a 5-year extension. It looks like it's $92 million in guarantees, which surpasses the record of $87 million that was given to Andrew Luck. The deal is also for essentially $27 million a year, which is more than Derek Carr just received. So that's putting Stafford at the top of all of the major lists at this point. He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And the interesting part about it is, blink and you're going to miss it, because we made a huge deal a month and a half ago when Derek Carr became the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And people were like, oh, my God, what's he done? You don't have a body of work. And now you're going to have the highest paid quarterback in the NFL be Matt Stafford, and where you say, what's he done? Because we do have a body of work. But then you're going to blink, and that's going to be surpassed again because Kirk Cousins is right there, and Kirk Cousins is going to take a bunch of money. But there's also other huge names, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers. There are guys coming up that are going to surpass this deal quickly. The economic profile of quarterbacking in the NFL has just flat out changed.
Yeah, but this contract is a little different. So Derek Carr, the most recent example, you're right, was a 5-year, $125 million contract, including $87 million guaranteed. This bumps past that by another $5 million and resets that market in a big, big way based on that number. So that's the thing to keep watching in all this, is as those guarantees creep up, and especially towards a new CBA and all these things people want to talk about for those other guys, because the high-end players, for most part, when you talk to other guys around the league, they're rooting for those guaranteed numbers to keep creeping up, because as those top-end guys inch closer and closer to fully guaranteed money, it only benefits everyone else in the trickle-down.
Well, and I have to look at it at some point and say, okay, where does it stop? It doesn't, right? So you're looking at these guaranteed numbers continuing to go up, and then you look at the names that are going to be coming up over the next few years. You no longer have to be a spectacular quarterback to get paid. And so we just need to reset our mindset at this point. If your team stinks and manages to hit a home run in the draft, a couple of things have changed. One, what do we see when you talk about Tom Brady? He wants to play till he's 45, and now Aaron Rodgers comes in and says, fine, I'll play till I'm 62, and Eli Manning's going to play till he's 84. Like, all these guys feel like they're going to play in the league forever, right? So you're at a spot now where if you draft your quarterback, you're going to be able to have your quarterback. If you can develop him and he can play, you're looking at the possibility of having somebody in that position for close to 20 years. I mean, Derek Carr's 25. So you can look at Derek Carr, you can look at Jameis Winston, you can look at Marcus Mariota, you can even look at Andrew Luck with all of the health issues he's had the last few years. Luck is still, 27, 28? So he's still got the opportunity to play for 13, 14 years. You're at a spot now where if a team can draft a quarterback and they can pay that quarterback, they can have a set for not just one generation of fandom, 2 generations of fandom out of one quarterback. The whole mentality around the position has changed.
Yeah, you're paying for comfort. You're paying for the comfort of not having to live how the other half does in constant search of that and making that such a big part of your focus. Because, again, if you can get the league to change the thing it values and the teams the thing it values in quarterback play and build it up maybe to an extent like the Denver Broncos did. People always point to them and the the early 2000s Ravens and say, well, look who they won with at quarterback. Well, yeah, but on the other side, you're saying, okay, you're just going to go ahead and build one of the best defenses of all time and have them be able to buoy that. Like, no. On your best day, you still need that signal caller at that position. And without having that ironed out, you leave yourself open to a lot of unnecessary variables. Like now they've at least got this ironed out for the next 5 years. They can say, all right, we've put this in the sand. We can spread it out, manipulate the numbers over the cap however we see fit to give us some wiggle room, and then try and address all of the myriad of other needs that we know the Lions have.
Isn't it a fair question, though, at some point to say, because you mentioned comfort. So we'll go back to think about your really comfortable shoes. You seem like the guy that's got shoes that should have been thrown away like 4 years ago, but they're comfy, and so you're going to continue to wear them until they fall apart, right? That feels like quarterbacking sometimes in the NFL. You're just going to have your guy there, and you're going to keep him until he falls apart. And there's a point where maybe they aren't the nicest shoes anymore, maybe they aren't the best shoes anymore, but you're just comfortable with them. When you look at Matt Stafford in a few years, how good can the Lions be with essentially a pair of really comfy shoes?
Well, and it's interesting in that regard because, yeah, we're going to make a lot of this about wins and losses. And listen, that's what they're ultimately judged on. And that's what a lot of the slight coming off this contract is for Matt Stafford. 5-46 as a starter against teams that finished the season with a winning record, including 2-4, 14 since 2015. And they're going to look at that and say, okay, yeah, that's absolutely the case. We're going to discredit him for all of those. But then when you bring up seasons like last year where he leads the charge on a lot of those comeback wins, they're going to say, well, you were bad the first 3 quarters, so why are we going to give you credit for it at the end? It's cherry picking where you give credit and where you put it in situations where all of it absolutely doesn't fall one way or the other on the quarterback unless it fits what you want to say.
But at some point, you're sort of darned if you do and darned if you don't, because I can't figure out what the right approach is for a team like the Lions. Let's just face it, they're usually not good. So now they have a quarterback, but even with the quarterback that they've had, they still haven't been great. So trying to figure out where the ceiling is, I think everybody wants to figure out, okay, how good can this team be? And I'm not sure the objective in the NFL anymore is to be great. I think the objective in the NFL more often than not is just to not be bad. If you can tread water and be good and just find your way into the playoffs, you got a chance. So you'll take a chance on a quarterback, or you'll pay a quarterback knowing that he's keeping you in the 9-7 range, just so that you don't have to roll the dice again and possibly be looking at 2-14 or 6-10 or 4-12 like the Lions were not too long ago.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange thing because that's part of the human element of all this, right? Is that there are people whose jobs and businesses are tied to the performance of this team. And if all of a sudden you slip down into the depths of sadness like the Jets and the Browns have inhabited for so long, it in theory starts to affect your business model in a way that's not nearly as much of a problem if you are a team that's at least in it every year. In a league where the margins are so razor thin between good and bad. Now, you can talk about outliers like the Patriots on the super far end of this and saying, well, they've clearly differentiated themselves in a way that stands out this offseason. But for everyone else, when the margins are so razor thin, it's about what's available to you and what you've planned for. And the Lions haven't planned for a successor to Matt Stafford, and they won't have that available to them even if they want to move on it now. Your best chance at a quarterback, if you're a team in the NFL looking to draft, is coming up in this next draft. And if you're the Lions, are you willing to give up a ton of your draft capital? What we hear, what the Patriots have made a living on for a long time, what we heard the Browns starting to move towards when Paul DePodesta signs on, to what they have started to do in their operation there. if you're starting to give up all that to get to a quarterback on the top, you're hindering all the other areas that people are telling you you're hindering now with this contract. Well, you can't build out the defense. Well, you can't bring in high-profile free agents. You're not exactly in the best position to do it on the other end if you have to start giving up the way you would either.
Well, Matt Stafford's in the best position to get a bunch of flowers. I mean, just take flowers to everybody. Nothing makes a summer birthday, anniversary, or a massive contract more magical than 1-800-Flowers.com. And even with all that money, he can still save money. Right now, when you order a dozen multicolored roses for only $29.99, you'll get another dozen absolutely free. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. Gojo, if I got a $92 million contract, I would get you a dozen roses, too. I would do that for you.
I hope it'd be a lot better than a dozen roses.
No.
I got some stuff done. I got some stuff around the house that needs to get done, all right? I need air conditioning.
No. I would get you the flowers along with a note that says, don't worry, don't fret. They were on sale. And that way you didn't feel like you had taken too much from me.
Hey, I appreciate you guarding my spending of your money. That means a lot.
I'm very frugal. Matt Stafford's not the only guy that's no longer going to have to be frugal, because as much as he's reset the floor for quarterback values, it's Kirk Cousins that's about to just blow it out of the water. What does this Stafford deal mean for Kirk, and how did the Redskins get themselves in that position? We'll look at that next. It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Ill Soul Song of the Day, always fantastic. And today, because of Michael Jackson's birthday, we had to go with a little MJ. It was difficult to decide which one to do, but after listening to Mike Golic Jr. sing this, and I use the word sing with air quotes you can't see, during all of the breaks, whistle it, hum it for the entire duration of the show, we felt like this was the one it has to be, right? It's difficult. And you can chime in on this, by the way, on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. Your favorite Michael Jackson song in honor of his birthday and in honor of All Souls song. So get to us with your favorite. He's at mgolic Jr. 57. I'm at Jason Fitz. The Right Time brought to you by Pennzoil Synthetics, taking synthetic motor oil to a whole new level. Make the switch to Pennzoil Synthetics today. Mike Golic, first and foremost, can you and I form a Bristol boy band where we can just do Jackson 5 covers?
I don't know if I've got quite the vocal range for young Michael necessarily, or any subsequent version of Michael Jackson after that. So you're really asking for a lot out of me, and I'm all about managing expectations.
Wait. Why is it you just automatically presumed that you were going to be the lead singer of this? Like, I mean,
I'm the only one with the it factor, all right? There's a reason you played the fiddle and sat in the background.
Oh,
you're not
man.
built for that life.
That is fantastic. That is the truest thing that Mike Golic Jr.'s ever said right there. So that's fine. You can be, but you do realize how absolutely tight the pants were that MJ wore in that situation. So we're going to have to find you some tailored, sweet bell bottoms that are too tight and too loose all at once. You're still in?
I'm open to a lot of bold fashion choices, all right? I've sort of made a living off of that as a larger man who's willing to take some risks.
No, well, also willing to take some risks. The Lions, Matt Stafford, you can argue that that's a risk with the deal that they've signed him to. But really, it's Kirk Cousins that's going to reset this whole thing. And I'll always go back to NFL Insiders a few months ago, and I was hosting with Jim Trotter, and he was the one that said that anytime you refer to the business that is done by Kirk Cousins, you have to refer to him as, quote, straight gangsta. And that's because he doesn't care about anything other than the business side of the business. So he doesn't let playing the game affect the business mind of it. And he's done this thing perfectly because he's in a situation where he's going to get grotesque money, right? There's a point where he's going to get just a new level of paid.
Yeah, it is, and it all goes back to Washington making this mistake early on back in, 2015, when they were offering him $7 million less than what the franchise tag would have been. And now even coming up to what we saw this last offseason, as they were trying to reach that long-term deal with him, they kept offering him an amount that he would have just made by taking the tag and continuing to bet on himself. And so it gets us to a weird place. Like, the reason guys like Matt Stafford get signed before their contract is ever up is so you can avoid situations like this where you actually have to face the prospect of paying a quarterback his true open market value. And this is for a guy that's in the middle of the pack of quarterbacks. So this is why we never see it, God forbid, with anyone even close to the top end. Guys like Rodgers, who are still, when their next deal comes up because of all of this, probably going to be paid around $30 million a year.
And don't you have to look at it at some point and say, if we're going to credit Kirk Cousins for his business, we almost have to discredit the Redskins for the way they've handled this at some point. They haven't drafted any sort of another option. They haven't given themselves a backup plan. They just continue to roll the dice and figure, hey, we'll keep him as long as we can keep him. If Kirk walks, then what? I mean, at this point, if the Redskins have a good season with Kirk Cousins and then he walks, what are they going to do?
Well, this is sort of found money for Kirk Cousins, right? Because none of this was ever supposed to happen. Robert Griffin III was supposed to be their quarterback. It was all supposed to play out the way the trajectory for this usually does. But when you had that roller coaster of events with him, when you have Kirk Cousins' sudden ascension here, and when you have a guy that wasn't willing to be lowballed in a place where, listen, in the NFL, a lot of guys take these long contracts because, as we know, the guarantees aren't what they are in other sports. You hear it all the time that the contracts are essentially written on toilet paper, and any semblance of security, especially for a guy that was picked where Cousins was in the draft, is usually welcome. But you've got a guy now that's willing to buck that trend and say, nah, I'm going to keep doubling down on me and try and put you in the most uncomfortable position possible. And when he backs it up enough with the numbers he's got, you get what you've got now.
It's going to be interesting to see because somebody's going to overpay for a, top 15 quarterback in that range? Top half of the league. They're going to overpay for a top half of the league quarterback. And because the Redskins choose not to overpay for a top half of the league quarterback, they're going to be ridiculed. Yet, what the Lions just did was paid for a top half of the league quarterback, and they're getting ridiculed. Like, you can't win in the situation of contract negotiations with the quarterback and the court, as we've talked about today so much, the court of public appeal, right, or opinion. You can't win in that court because everybody's made up their mind of what they think a quarterback should be paid. And the fact is, those values have reset, and the world is not resetting with it quickly enough.
But to your point, like, we talk about how quickly these contracts even now are going to be dated. Kirk Cousins, they could have had him for about $22 million a year, which is bargain bin stuff at this point, a contract that he would still be under. And so you know that, and that's why you sew these guys up before you approach a lot of these bigger milestones, and you just understand. Aaron Rodgers, that's why so many people gripe about his contract now. That's why we've heard little rumblings from him along the way that he's looking forward to that next payday, because you very quickly as a quarterback become underpaid at your position relative to the marketplace.
Well, and that's an interesting situation to be in because then you're rolling the dice as an organization, but you'd rather roll the dice as an organization on somebody too early and throw away money than turn around and not roll the dice too early on somebody and be stuck at the quarterback position. And that's essentially the exact spot that the Redskins have put themselves in. And I think it's sort of a game changer. We've talked so much, and you and I have talked to before, about guaranteed contracts in the NFL and how it's going to take somebody that stands up and says, I'm not going to sign for anything other than 100% guaranteed money to change sort of the spectrum. Some think that Kirk Cousins could be that guy. Ultimately, though, in a copycat league where you've got teams looking at how business is done, teams around the league have to be looking at the Kirk Cousins situation and saying, okay, well, the players have now seen that they can't hold all the cards, which means we have to be aggressive in making sure we lock guys up because we don't want to be stuck in that exact situation where a player feels as empowered as Kirk has, and suddenly the team is they're stuck.
Yeah, because usually the quarterback is asked to be the face of the franchise in a lot of senses, and one of those is, like we always laud Tom Brady for, taking less so that they can build a better team around you, or not at least hamstringing your team in a way that a lot of people are going to accuse Matthew Stafford of right now. You're asked to sort of be a bit altruistic in your approach if you're not one of those premier top-flight guys, and that's just not realistic for anyone involved, especially when the teams are willing to do it and understand, or at least have the belief at this point that's the defining characteristic of the league, that the quarterback is the most important thing that you can have.
Well, it absolutely is going to play forward over the next year, not just with Kirk Cousins. He's going to set a new bar. But again, like we mentioned earlier, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, these are all guys that are going to hit the open market, and they're going to hit the market, or they're going to have the opportunity to hit the market. They're going to have their contracts reworked. They're going to sign for huge money. The spectrum is only going to continue to change. Kirk Cousins is setting the new floor. You talk about identity. When you talk about identity of a team, Art Briles still has an identity that is linked forever to Baylor, rightfully so. And it looked yesterday for a few hours like he was about to take a new job. It all fell apart. We'll tell you what happened, and I'll tell you why I think it's amazing. We'll do that next. The Right Time, Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. Handcrafted. It's all the rage. From flour pressed soap to homemade hot sauce to artisanal pickles. I don't even know what an artisanal pickle is, but it sounds good. Well, Firestone Complete Auto Care is glad it's catching on because they've been handcrafting repairs since 19 26. And their 4,000 ASE certified technicians work hard every day to help keep cars running like new. Before people were making organic greeting cards and rock jewelry in their basements, Firestone Complete Auto Care has been hard at work in the garage, tightening, torquing, wrenching, and they back that work with their fixed right promise, guaranteeing your car is fixed right, your repair is priced right, and the work is completed right on time. Keep your car running newer, longer. When the road gets rough, you need a set of tires that can get tough. Right now at Firestone Complete Auto Care, get $70 by mail on a Bridgestone Visa prepaid card when you buy a set of 4 eligible Bridgestone tires. Whatever you drive a Firestone. Offer valid August 10th through October 8th. In-store only. Claim form required. Excludes Blizzak. Restrictions apply. See claim form for eligible tires and details. Prepaid card issued by the Bancorp Bank, member FDIC.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
I'm with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. The phone number, 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776.
I got a real dilemma here, Fitzy.
Oh, ooh, okay.
Got a real dilemma.
Okay.
I'm going to do my best to be present with you guys here, but my fantasy football draft just started for one of my bigger leagues. The one with a lot of folks on campus here, a lot of prominent ESPN names featured in this group, and so I feel compelled to put my best foot forward there, but I obviously also recognize that this is technically my job to be on this show right now, so if you hear a little awkward silence, just, lamp for me a little bit, help the dude out. I got a pick coming up in like 4 or 5 picks, so we got time.
Can you reveal the biggest name that's in that fantasy football league with you? Are you allowed to reveal that to us? I
don't know. You may have heard of him, renowned SportsCenter anchor Randy Scott.
Okay, so I'm wondering why Mike Golic Jr. doesn't just send a group text out and say, guys, I'm on the radio, so that time is changing. And you don't even put it up for a question. You just announce that time is changing, and you give them the new time. You're Mike Golic Jr.
Yeah, I don't think you tell Matt Berry and Kerry Chow that.
Yes, you do. You say, I'm Gojo. Oh, and actually, that's how you say, Gojo says times change. Times are a-changing. And then you just send out the new time. You're Mike Golic Jr.
Yeah, that doesn't carry a lot of weight in this group or any group right now, Fitz. So you're going to have to figure out a different strategy if you're going to try and actually help me right here. But if not, you can also just send me draft suggestions at this point. We got AB. We're the 3rd overall pick in the draft. It's really nice because everyone loves hearing about someone else's fantasy team.
Everyone, that is only when it comes from you because you're Mike Golic Jr. ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance, creators of the Name Your Price tool. Choose from a range of coverage options and pick the price that works for you. If you're just tuning into the riveting radio, this is the Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. All of our guests have appeared on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line tonight, and we will get into a bit of a heavy conversation here, but we want to make sure we touch on something that I think the world sort of got right. Yesterday, a report surfaced that Art Briles was taking a job as a coach with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, an assistant coach. Hamilton Tiger Cats, for those of you that don't know, our Canadian football team. And so Art Briles looked like was headed north of the border. And Art Briles, obviously, the head coach overseeing Baylor during the sexual assaults chapter of that university. And you look at it at some point and say, when we heard that news, my first thought was, okay, maybe, and this sounds strange, but maybe it's sort of it's a more pressing issue to us in America than it is in Canada. One thing that's always surprised me, having spent a lot of time in Canada in my life on tour, is that the media cycle runs very different there. It's just it's much more difficult to get things like football coverage and college football coverage, rightfully so in Canada, is very difficult to find because, let's face it, they're not invested in it. So I think that there was a disconnect. And sometimes when you go international, you hear about a language disconnect. I immediately attributed this to a language disconnect. And that's honestly what it looks like it turned out to be, because ultimately, only hours later, the Hamilton Tiger Cats sat down with the Canadian Football League, with the team, or with the league, and they sat down and decided that given the media uproar, they needed to go ahead and reverse this. So he is not going to be a coach and has stepped in. And this is one of those moments where social media really came in handy. That was a big part of what made Canada aware of the way America felt about this hire. I thought that was a really strong moment.
Yeah, so he was going to get signed as an offensive assistant on this. And I heard a discussion this morning. Will Kane was filling in on the Russillo show and talked about, is this the road we want to go down where this sort of outrage can prevent someone from ever working in their field again? Or do the idea of second chances go out the window? And I think this situation becomes a little bit different because this isn't just one person's action. This isn't an instant where one person committed a crime or did something, and we're talking about the potential for that person to turn their life around and try and impact the world and the community in a positive way and do so gainfully employed in the field that they chose to work in. This is a guy who, in a position of power, affected the lives of a lot of people, and I think you've got to grade that a little bit differently when this is something. I mean, you go back and look at the things that we talked about in Baylor. A 2014 lawsuit alleged that 31 different players committed 52 acts of rape between 2011 and 2014 while he was there. You're talking about the same coach that him and the former athletic director Ian McCaw were accused of being made aware of a group sexual assault by some of Art Briles' players and not reporting that along the way. So that kind of egregious behavior that affects so many people, I don't think can easily be as fit into that box of, well, let's just talk about this in terms of second chances.
Well, and I'll long say this, and this is not a popular opinion, but it's one I've shared on many of the shows I've been able to host this summer. I'm not a huge fan of many of the concepts that come with second chances. I believe that we all have a second chance at life. We deserve a second chance at life, but you don't always get a second chance at a dream job. You don't get a second chance at epic careers, and I'll use touring as an example. If as a touring musician, I had a lot of rules. Many touring musicians have a lot of rules. You can't act certain ways despite what people think, and so you can go out, and if you break the rules, at some point you'll be fired. But above and beyond that, if you want to be a financial advisor and you've been convicted of a felony, you have to fill that out. You can't do that. There are different rules for every job, and as someone that, as I've been open about, my brother spent a substantial amount of time in prison. I understand what second chances are geared towards. And do you deserve a second chance at life? Sure. Do you deserve a second chance at your dream job? Not always. And I think that's part of what this comes back to. Art Briles certainly can go out and make a life for himself. He can get a job if he needs to. He can work if he wants to. He can do those things. Does he necessarily get the opportunity to coach again? That's no. And I have no problem with coming in as a hardline and saying Art Briles, and frankly, to me, everybody that was involved in his staff shouldn't get a second opportunity. I also am one of the people that stand up and say I would have no problem shutting down all sports at Baylor University. I have no problem with that.
This is one of those things, too, that it comes up with, and we had a different version of the same conversation with everyone that wanted to bring this up with Colin Kaepernick. Well, if he was a better player, he'd be signed, or this, that, and the other. Now, the thing I will differentiate right from the start is you have one of these things that is a very objective evil and one of them that is not. One of them that you cannot qualify as anything objectively bad in what Colin Kaepernick has done. But one thing we always talk about is the influence and I always say the subjective morality of things based on what you can offer someone. And especially in this case with the Hamilton Tiger Cats is with this still fresh, what Art Briles offers you as an offensive assistant on a team that is in this situation because they started off their season horrifically and made a coaching change and all these things is what he's worth in that regard. Worth on the other end everything that you catch with him. You want to bring up off-the-field issues. This is really an off-the-field issue, not what we've been masquerading as one for a while now on this side of the border.
Well, and again, for as long as we sit back and we talk about the evils of social media, because social media can be treacherous waters for people to navigate in general. This is one of those moments where it always surprised me if we were up in Canada on tour and I'd try and get some sort of update on college football. You can't find it. It doesn't get covered. You don't even get highlights for most games. It's difficult to really get a sense of it. This felt like one of those moments where the guys north of the border just weren't aware of the impact this had. And it was, in fact, social media and the clamor of the people that made everyone aware. In that process, it did something fantastic in the sense that it made them aware so that they could make an educated decision on what they were willing to sacrifice to bring him on staff. They made that decision, and in my mind, they made the right one. Speaking of decisions, Mike Golic Jr. is making decisions right now on his fantasy draft. We'll get an update because I know everybody wants to know exactly who Mike Golic Jr. has taken. We'll do that next up on The Right Time with Bomani Jones. It's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. It's The Right Time with Bomani Jones. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. I've had the privilege of being a friend of Mike Golic Jr. for a year. I've stood next to him on TV when I had no idea what I was doing. And Mike's always been there for me. You know, every time I've sort of been a little overwhelmed, Mike's been there for me. And, you know, we've done some radio together. Mike's always been there for me. We did Mike and Mike together. And even though he demoralized me in a donut eating contest, he was still there for me. So I want to be there for you right now, my friend. I do. But I just saw you crack under pressure. I've been on TV. I've been on radio, all these things with you. And
congrats on your career resume. We got bigger problems going on here right now.
I'm this is about you, buddy. I'm watching you melt down in your fantasy draft. I don't know what's happened, but you are at a 9 at this point. The level of fear you have, I'm worried about you, my friend.
We're getting to some of those middle rounds right now where you start to make or break your team. And I started off hot in this draft. Got Antonio Brown, 3rd overall pick. Got myself Amari Cooper on the back end of that. Followed it up with a bright young rookie, Christian McCaffrey. You may have heard of him. Going to go out there and do big things for the Panthers and for my team this year. And then I got to a point now where I'm like, all right, do I need another high-level running back? And I take Mark Ingram, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. I don't think Adrian Peterson's a fit there, but it's going to be a split backfield regardless. They drafted Alvin Kamara. Like, there's a lot of things to take consideration here.
You just crumbled. You crumbled. You have played for a national championship. You don't crumble on fantasy football drafts.
Yeah, how'd that go?
Well, I wasn't gonna. I was trying to make it a positive.
Not
right?
very well.
I was flipping a pot. It was a pot. You are.
Your overwhelming positivity is not helping me in the real world right now. All right, we got another pick coming up. We're almost on the clock here.
Okay, so walk us through. For your first pick, you went who?
Easy pick. I was 3rd overall in the draft, Antonio Brown.
Okay, and your second pick, you went
Amari Cooper.
So you went with the number 2 Raiders.
I gave you a Raider on there,
and then, but I mean, yeah,
a guy who in the last few seasons hasn't even led his team in targets and touchdowns.
Right, you went with the number 2 wide receiver in Oakland as your second pick, not the number 1.
He's going to have
receiver.
A big year. Oh, we just got Larry Fitzgerald. That easy. Sitting there. People just passing it up. Idiots.
The way you just flipped, you just went from total length. I mean, Shannon, back me up on this. Like, we're watching a little kid at this point that is spun up, right?
Yeah, he was questioning everything. He was like, what do I do? What do I do? Because I'm Denny Woodhead, and I don't know if I can trust him. And he's coming.
Got a hamstring right now.
And you got the hamstring, and you got Adrian Peterson, and you got Mark Ingram in the same backfield. Where do I go? God. It was really impressive to watch. Like, the wheels, you could literally see the wheels turning in Mike's head. It was really, really impressive.
Sat there for 28 hours on a fantasy marathon. I picked up a few things, and now they're all conflicting with each other because the problem with taking advice from all the people on that marathon is, spoiler alert, they disagree on some things.
Well, how many of those fellow marathoners are currently in your fantasy draft?
Not many. I mean, we kept some of the heavy hitters out of this as far as the fantasy aspect of things. Like Matthew Berry is not in this league. It's sure. Matt Berry of SportsCenter fame. We don't have Field Yates in this league. Again, we've dubbed him with his better-looking counterpart in Randy Scott.
So you ran from the heavy hitters with fear. But the biggest part, there were 10 seconds left, and I thought you were going to lose it. I mean, this is not the Mike Golic Jr. I know.
Listen, man, there's a lot on the line for this one. I don't want to get into it right now, but there's a lot on the line for this.
How many fantasy leagues are you playing in?
Not many. I got this one, and I got one that's actually markedly more serious. So one of the features that we did all along the way during the fantasy marathon, which is my favorite portion of all this, are the punishments levied down by some leagues. And we've seen tattoo leagues. We saw a league during this last fantasy marathon where someone had to drink a shake concocted by the winner of the league. That was utterly terrifying. I mean, it had like mustard and hot sauce and all this other stuff in it that you don't want to drink. And so I've got a league with my closest friends, like the guys I played college ball with that I still keep in touch with, and we're trying to figure out a punishment league, and we want something that's high stakes like that on the back end. I mean, I've heard of leagues where the winner gets to send the loser on a bus trip of his choice across the country, and you can imagine how horrific that goes. So I want to try and make this hurt because I don't plan on losing.
Shannon, how many fantasy football leagues are you in?
You know what's funny about that? I'm not in one yet. I still got time, though.
You and me both, buddy. You and me both. And this is why. Like, I'm looking at your level of anxiety, and I'm thinking, man, you're going to have a heart attack, Golic.
Listen, spent a long portion of my life dealing with that pinprick of adrenaline in situations where you've got high stakes and things demanded of you. And right now, the only other place I can really chase and find that is a blackjack table, and I figured this one is markedly less detrimental to my bank account.
No, that is a fair point. I mean, I won't fault you on that. As I just learned in Vegas, like my wife Sunny could play blackjack all day, and that scares me a little bit. So I wish, like, maybe I'll get her into fantasy football. She can replace the blackjack rush with fantasy.
There's no replacing the rush of splitting 4 8s and then getting to double 3 of them. All against a dealer 10. Like, that's the stuff dreams are made of. That's where you win and lose the night, and where you win and lose fantasy is where I'm at right now in this draft. So again, I don't have any semblance of money on the table right now that would kill me like that one, but it feels the same.
Well, I took the little card with me, and you can put that on the blackjack table, and it tells you what to do. So somebody had to coach me. I'm a Vegas kid, and I had to be coached through it. You guys can get out to Golic's Twitter, out at mgolic Jr. 57. Coach him up on what to do here. I'm worried about his health. I'm worried about his safety. Mike, I need you tomorrow. We're going to be back tomorrow, by the way, and so I expect a full update. We would like, a full update on how it all went. Jalen and Jacoby, they're going to be up next. They'll get you an update on everything going on with Ezekiel Elliott. That's coming up on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Thanks for listening to the Right Time Podcast. Please come back tomorrow for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Okay, keep your eyes closed.
Okay.
I want to show you my first ever painting.
All right.
Okay. Open your eyes.
Oh, that's a lot of colors and shapes.
So be honest. What do you think?
Well, I like how if you switch to Geico, you could save hundreds of dollars on car insurance.